Paul and Philip Collins welcoming you to another episode of the Collins Bros Unleashed. This week we are going to continue with our exploration of agent provocateurs and the Patriot movement and attempts by deviant elites and the criminalized faction of the intelligence community to use the Patriot movement to fulfill a sinister agenda that includes undermining constitutional government and national sovereignty. We began last week's show by looking at an article written by Confederate apologist Chuck Baldwin entitled, "Is Obama Really Preparing for Civil War?" The Baldwin article relies heavily on an article at the European Union Times website. While the European Union Times website claims to be an online copyright newspaper founded in October 2009, it is in fact a blog and not an official media organ. The article at the EU Times is entitled, "Obama Orders 1 Million U.S. Troops for Civil War," and it was originally authored by someone writing under the name Sorsha Fal. This name is most likely a pseudonym. Fal's writings appear at David Booth's WhatDoesItMean.com website. Booth is the author of an anti-Christian tract entitled "Dirty Filthy Christians, Treatise on the Most Dangerous Death Cult in Human History," and his website is filled with sensational yellow journalism that tops the headlines of most supermarket tabloids. Most of the articles are written by Fal, and one need only read the story titles to understand that her allegations are not supported by the evidence. Here are just a few of the titles of Fal's articles. Obama issues immediate assassination order for Mexican President Calderon. Obama orders total takedown of U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. Obama warned by CIA, surrender or join Kennedy. And of course our personal favorite, Russia's FSB reports pop icon Michael Jackson assassinated by CIA. Of course, none of these claims made by Fal or whatever that this person's name is are supported by the facts. They are baseless contentions, and their sensationalist character may be an attempt to attract a large audience of people with a taste for the unreal and the fantastic. I don't rule out the possibility that Fal's articles are disinformation meant to muddy the waters for legitimate researchers into the world of conspiracy and geek politics, but understand that there are a lot of hacks out there who know all too well that outrageous claims sell books, articles, tapes, DVDs, etc. The main reason I don't totally discount the possibility that Fal is a disinformation is the fact that he, she, or it is mindful to make sure that small elements of truth are contained in many articles to ensure that readers are drawn in. Fal intentionally drops references to very real intelligence crimes such as Operations Northwoods and very real political anomalies that should raise concern, such as the CIA's relocation of its domestic division to Denver. But these and other factional tidbits are then used to take high dive leaps into fictional tales about assassination plots and claims of imminent martial law and imminent war. But we don't believe that Baldwin was necessarily concerned with the veracity of Fal's claims. The reason that Baldwin sourced Fal is because Fal's writings help reinforce Baldwin's contention that states should start breaking away from the United States. As a matter of fact, in the Baldwin article that cites Fal, one reads the following. Quote, "The fact is we do need a revolution, but not a revolution of anarchy and pitchforks. The history of France should be ample evidence of the futility of this strategy. We need a revolution of the individual states to reclaim their sovereignty and fight for the liberties of their sovereigns, we the people." That is exactly what our forefathers did in 76. America's founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, declares that our states are free and independent. And so they are. We are not one nation with one all-powerful central government. We are a confederation of nation-states united in a voluntary union, with each state reserving to itself the power and authority of self-determination and ceding the federal government limited, specifically delineated duties and limitations that have been totally ignored to the point that for all intents and purposes, our once great constitutional republic has been thoroughly expunged. Therefore, it is now time for the states to stand up to this meddlesome, ever-growing tyranny that is known as Washington, D.C., and defend the rights and liberties of their citizens, unquote. Then Baldwin recommends a series of prescriptions written by Dr. Edwin Vieira as, quote, a template for every state governor and legislature that truly cares about liberty, unquote. These prescriptions appear in Vieira's article at newswithviews.com entitled Tea Parties Need Teeth. In the article, Vieira recommends a revitalization of the militias of several states. He is, of course, referencing the Second Amendment of the Constitution, but the idea of a militia seems to be ripped from its contextual matrix by Vieira. Vieira views the militia as a means of transforming each state into its own sovereign body that can reject any and all authority emanating from the federal government. Vieira writes, quote, the purpose of revitalizing the militia is to combine all the elements of each state's homeland security, including police, emergency response, and so on, under the militia in order to obviate top-down control by the police state apparatus being set up through the Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C., and its various satellites, transmissions belts, and fellow travelers around the country, unquote. Vieira's article comes from an address that he presented at the National Heritage Center for Constitutional Studies, and it is obviously admonishing the Tea Party participants to militarize and establish a system separate from the federal government, which he refers to as the general government. Vieira writes, quote, we the people need to revitalize the militia of the several states in order to regain and retain popular control over state governments, and through them regain and retain control over the two fundamental powers of sovereignty. One, the power of the purse, i.e. currency and credit. Two, the power of the sword, i.e. community and self-defense. As we pointed out last week, succession is anything but a patriotic act. We observed that succession can act as a means of regionalizing. Regionalism is a globalist method of undermining national security. And it's basically a method of destroying national sovereignty through fragmentation. The ultimate ends of regionalism is world government. To support this contention, we referred to an article by N.S.B. Gross entitled Regionalism and Nationalism, which appeared in the flagship publication of the globalist and elite combine, the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR. Grass wrote, quote, the direct effect of regionalism may be to make the state weaker politically but stronger economically and socially. Or the region looking to regional convenience may make new alignments leading to the creation of new states or to international states, European, American, and so on, or ultimately to a world state, unquote. In his book Geoeconomic Regionalism and World Federalism, Maurice Parmelee was even more blunt at pointing out regionalism's usefulness as a tool by which one undermines national sovereignty and introduces world government. Parmelee writes, quote, there can be no permanent peace so long as each nation retains its sovereignty. There can be no effective world organization to solve the economic and social problems of mankind so long as the nation is the unit of organization. The region, limiting national sovereignty and furnishing a suitable unit of organization for a world federation is a practicable solution, unquote. Given successionism's potential as a tool for regionalism, it is interesting to find that Governor Rick Perry of Texas actually implicitly promoted succession during an April 15, 2009 Tea Party protest. Perry told the audience, quote, Texas is a unique place. When we came into the Union in 1845, one of the issues was that we would be able to leave if we decided to do that. My hope is that America and Washington in particular pays attention. We've got a great union There's absolutely no reason to dissolve it, but if Washington continues to thumb its nose at the American people, who knows what may come of that, unquote. Before you conclude that Perry made such a suggestive statement because he is a patriot who views succession as a patriotic act, consider the good governor's participation in the annual Bilderberg Conference. Perry's involvement in the Bilderberg meetings was reported by Christy Hopp in a May 31st, 2007 Dallas Morning News article entitled "Perry Off to the Secret Forum in Turkey." Hopp writes, quote, "Governor Rick Perry is flying to Istanbul, Turkey today to speak at the super-secret Bilderberg Conference, a meeting of about 130 international leaders in business, media, and politics. The invitation-only conference was started in 1954 and named for the Dutch hotel where the conference was first held. Those who attend promise not to reveal what was discussed. Security is tight, and the press and public is barred," unquote. Hunt goes on to explain that Perry, quote, "was invited to attend and speak about state-federal relations," unquote. Given the conference's secrecy, we are left only to speculate on what Perry said about state-federal relations. If what he said was even close to his statements at the April 15, 2009 Tea Party, however, we can be sure successionist themes were prominent in his presentation. Bilderberg participants would not be opposed to such ideas because they understand the destructive effects succession has on national sovereignty. Bilderberg founder Prince Bernhard once stated, quote, "It is difficult to re-educate people who have been brought up on nationalism to the idea of relinquishing part of their sovereignty to a supranational body," unquote. Succession could provide a useful tool in the re-educating process Prince Bernhard believed needed to take place. After all, if a country is splintered enough, nationhood becomes a mere fiction. So upon closer examination, one realizes Governor Perry is not working in the best interest of America when he espouses successionist ideas. By promoting militias among Tea Party participants, Edwin Vieira seems to be pushing Tea Party participants into a movement that has historically been controlled by dark, sinister portions of the state and criminalized portions of the intelligence community. I believe that no greater example exists of agent provocateurs among the patriot and militia movement than Hal Turner, who was recently outed as an FBI informant, and perhaps more than just an informant. He could have very well been working on the FBI's behalf, basically stoking a lot of violence and hatred among patriot groups and among white supremacist groups. He is considered a megaphone for the militia movement, and actually voices a lot of sentiments held by the militia movement today. And so, with that, we'll turn our attentions to Hal Turner's story. Few who are familiar with America's white nationalist movement have not heard of Hal Turner. Turner has been an unabashed proponent of anti-Semitism, including Holocaust denial and the open advocacy of the systematic incarceration and extermination of Jews. Yet, while Turner is typically considered the voice of extremism, he may have sponsors within the hallowed halls of officialdom. On January 2008, anonymous hackers engaged in a heated exchange with Turner on his own website, accusing the neo-Nazi talk show host of being on the FBI payroll in support of this contention. The hackers posted a July 7th email that Turner allegedly sent to his FBI handler. The email contained a death threat targeting Senator Russ Feingold, which had been allegedly sent to Turner's website. Writing to his handler, Turner states, quote, "Once again, my fierce rhetoric has served to flush out a possible crazy," unquote. The hackers also presented another email in which Turner allegedly discusses his pay with his handler. These revelations incited a great deal of debate on another major neo-Nazi website on January 10th. That same day, Turner abruptly announced, quote, "I hereby separate from the pro-white movement. I will no longer involve myself in any aspect of it," unquote. In addition to resigning from political activism on behalf of the white supremacist movement, Turner ended his popular radio show. Needless to say, Turner's sudden withdrawal from a cause for which he expressed so much passion prompts more than a little suspicion. Firstly, it bespeaks a decidedly pragmatic melted shout on the part of Turner. Secondly, it is redolent of an abortive COINTELPRO project. COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, was an illegal campaign of surveillance, infiltration, marginalization, and subversion conducted by the FBI against dissident political organizations in the United States. COINTELPRO warped public perception of radical groups, thereby marginalizing their activists and legitimizing overt political repression. The covert modus operandi of COINTELPRO enabled questionable elements within the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to undermine political opposition, while simultaneously maintaining an illusory democracy that ostensibly embraced the principles of free speech and the rule of law. FBI disclosures revealed 6 official COINTELPRO counterintelligence programs. They are as follows. 1. Groups seeking independence for Puerto Rico, which basically encompassed secessionist organizations such as the Puerto Rican Independence Party. 2. Communist Party USA. Of course, this was a stateside Marxist political party that publicly disavowed all ties to the Soviet Union. However, there is voluminous evidence revealing a consistent pattern of Soviet funding and espionage within the Communist Party USA. For instance, the CPUSA received a significant Soviet subsidy from 1959 to 1989. Such financing reflected the party's obsequious servility to Moscow. Parenthetically speaking, here, there's a kind of sick irony to basically the COINTELPRO project's targeting of the CPUSA. While the FBI was not against basically undermining the influence of the Soviet Union on the CPUSA, they were also not opposed to using the CPUSA for their own political purposes as well. There is a large body of evidence that seems to suggest that domestic communism was not just manipulated by the Soviet Union, but by the FBI through a top-secret program codenamed Solo. And part of that program called for the recruitment of high-level Communist Party members. And in 1954, the Bureau recruited Morris Childs, who was the principal deputy to Gus Hall. Gus Hall, of course, was the head of the American Communist Party. For 27 years, Childs was known as Agent 58 to his FBI handlers, and he reported on the activities of the American Communist Party. So he was basically in a perfect position to influence the thinking of Gus Hall on behalf of the FBI. So essentially, the FBI was working to undercut the influence of Moscow within the CPUSA, while simultaneously work to direct the efforts of the CPUSA to facilitate various agendas and initiatives held by the darker elements within the Bureau. The third of the 6 official counterintelligence programs that were revealed by FBI disclosures was the New Left, which encompassed the predominantly white student movement that protested the Vietnam War, advocated many university reforms, advanced participatory democracy, and promoted civil rights. Included within this category would be the Students for a Democratic Society, or the SDS. The fourth group targeted by FBI counterintelligence programs was the Socialist Workers' Party, a communist political party that supported Cuba and emphasized solidarity work to aid strikes. The fifth group was the Black Nationalist hate groups, which unfairly encompassed Martin Luther King and associated civil rights organizations. To be sure, there were some black organizations that did qualify as hate groups, such as the Black Panthers, which prolifically distributed the Red Book by Mao and adhered to Maoism and promoted black separatist black separatist doctrines, work to basically undermine any and all legitimate federal law enforcement and constitutional governance in favor of creating a sovereign state for African Americans only. This group basically held to the same sort of successionist doctrines that we see being promoted by neo-Confederates today, albeit an African or an Afrocentric variety of successionism. The sixth and final group targeted by the FBI's counterintelligence programs was white hate groups, encompassing predominantly white supremacist and separatist organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan. Now, at this juncture, it's important for the listening audience to understand that although these organizations were the targets of an illegal campaign of political repression, some of their respective ideological pedigrees were no less radical. The overall climate of radicalism promoted by these organizations provided a politically and socially expedient pretext for the creation and maintenance of unconstitutional machinations like COINTELPRO. So we want to avoid shifting too far to the left because many leftist apologists for these groups overlook the group's obvious radical pedigree simply in favor of completely and totally excoriating the FBI as some sort of enclave for right-wing extremism. That's not the case in this particular case study. What we're dealing with here is not some sort of binary opposition of idealistic, good counterculture ideologues against a authoritarian and oppressive big state apparatus such as the FBI. Instead, we're dealing with varying degrees of evil, both of which tended to find initiatives and agendas occasionally synchronizing, and this is one of the reasons why the FBI could, at times through COINTELPRO, make use of some of these groups. In fact, many COINTELPRO targets were actually manufactured by the very establishment that they ostensibly opposed. And the radical treaties do it. Revolutionary leader of the Yippies, Jerry Rubin, writes, quote, "The hip capitalists have some allies within the revolutionary community, long hairs who work as intermediaries between the kids on the street and the millionaire businessman," unquote. And the Strawberry Statement notes of a college revolutionary, former revolutionary James Coonan, gives the following account of the 1968 SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, National Convention. He writes, quote, "Also at the convention, men from Business International roundtables, the meetings sponsored by the Business International for their client groups and heads of government, tried to buy out a few radicals. These men are the world's leading industrialists, and they convene to decide how our lives are going to go. These are the boys who wrote the Alliance for Progress. They're the left wing of the ruling class. They agreed with us on black control and student control. They want McCarthy in. They see fascism as the threat, see it coming from Wallace. The only way McCarthy could win is if the crazies and young radicals act up and make Gene more reasonable. They offered to finance our demonstrations in Chicago. We were also offered ESO, that is, Rockefeller money. They want us to make a lot of radical commotion so they can look more in the center as they move to the left," unquote. Another individual who discovered this connection between the elite and the revolutionary community was undercover police intelligence operative David Gumeyer. Gumeyer took part in SDS demonstrations, and he states that he wondered, quote, "where the money was coming from for all this activity, and soon discovered it came through radicals via the United Nations, from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, United Auto Workers, as well as cigar boxes of American money from the Cuban embassy," unquote. The evidence indicated that the ruling class financed violence on the part of the counterculture. In 1970, Ohio legislators were startled by a briefing which included an Illinois commission report that addressed SDS uprisings on Ohio campuses. The report revealed that $85,000 in Carnegie Foundation funds and $192,000 of federal money were paid to the Students for a Democratic Society during the fall of 1969, before the House and Senate Security Committees. Former Communist Party member and FBI informant James Kirk made the following statement, quote, "They, 60s radicals, have no idea they are playing into the hands of the establishment they claim to hate. The radicals think they are fighting the forces of the super-rich like Rockefeller and Ford, and don't realize that it is precisely such forces which are behind their own revolution, financing it and using it for their own purposes," unquote. So, to be fair, parenthetically speaking, to be fair to the 60 radicals, there were occasions where some of the radicals began to actually catch on. One revolutionary who began to become wise to the establishment manipulation of the movement was Stokely Carmichael, the leader of the SNCC. James Kirk, a FBI, the very same FBI, informant that basically claimed that radicals have no idea, that they're fighting for the oligarchs, related Stokely Carmichael's story, he related the account where Stokely Carmichael was basically having his awakening and announcing his awakening to the fact that they were being manipulated by the power elite. Turning to James Kirk's own words, quote, "Mr. Carmichael was obviously in the middle of something very important, which made him more nervous and tense than in the past. He started speaking of things which he said could not have said before his research was not because his research was not finished. He repeated a line from the song he liked so well, 'Something is happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones?' He kept hitting on the theme that a very large monopoly capitalist money group, the Bakers to be exact, was instrumental in fomenting the idea that the Jews are the ones actually behind the oppression of the blacks. And the agencies of this power, he cited banks, the chief among them, were Morgan Guarantee Trust and Chase Manhattan, and the foundations connected with these monoliths," unquote. Now, what became of Mr. Carmichael after he came forth with this startling revelation? Shortly after he came forth with these ideas and basically pointed out the manipulation of the left-wing counterculture by the power elite, he was removed from the SNCC and from the Black Panthers. And he was basically a non-lethal casualty of war. He had learned too much and he knew too much, so his influence was expunged. And it's interesting to note also that he had brought to light the fact that Jewish conspiracy theories were actually being promulgated by shadowy figures who were hoping to basically manipulate the efforts of supposed grassroots activists. Later on in this presentation, we'll go into some of the probable originators of these Jewish conspiracy theories, and we'll go into the possibility that these Jewish conspiracy theories originated within the state, rather than with paranoids and members of the lunatic fringe. Absolutely. Well, such dialectical manipulation of radical organizations allowed the power elite to exert considerable social and political pressure on the lower tiers of the overall socioeconomic structure, and turned the prospect of violent political activism engendered a tacit justification of political repression, increasingly egregious constitutional violations, and ultimately totalitarianism. White hate groups were equally useful to the power elite and their surrogates within the FBI. For instance, the Bureau covertly funded the KKK and other white supremacist organizations so long as they restricted their assaults to groups that were mutually targeted by COINTELPRO. The case of Hal Turner could represent a continuation of the COINTELPRO agenda. the FBI's response to questions about the Bureau's involvement with Turner only compounds this suspicion. It was Agent Richard Kolko of the agency's press unit that stated, quote, "Long-standing FBI policy prohibits disclosing who may or may not provide information," unquote. When approached about his possible involvement with the Bureau, Turner also declined to comment. All of this, of course, is very, very suspicious. Needless to say, revelations of Turner's possible involvement with the FBI has outraged the many supremacist neo-Nazis and white separatists who now consider the ideologue in their own colorful language, quote-unquote, a race traitor. Yet, sounder minds are also disturbed by the revelations. James Nolan, an associate sociology professor at West Virginia University, who is an expert in police procedure and a former unit chief in the FBI's Crime Analysis Research and Development Unit, stated, quote, "This is clearly over the line. Informants may be involved in drugs, and you overlook that because of the greater good. However, these are viable threats. They could be carried out, that the FBI clearly knows about. I want to see the FBI stop it," unquote. Jack Levin, a criminology professor and expert on the radical right at Northeastern University, said, quote, "These are frightening groups whose members deserve to be investigated and infiltrated. My concern is that Turner's methods actually are more dangerous and destructive than the evil they are seeking to cure. His threatening messages may actually inspire neo-Nazis to up the ante to engage in even more destructive behavior," unquote. Mike German, a former FBI agent who has corresponded with informants himself, reiterated this contention, saying, quote, This certainly raises a whole lot of questions that need to be answered in a public forum. There are strict rules about what an informant is allowed to do, and certainly encouraging or instigating others to commit acts of violence is far beyond what FBI agents should have their informants doing. Aside from the fact that you're possibly encouraging someone to commit an act of violence, there's also the danger that you're actually entrapping that person, which means he could get off, unquote. Such concerns are not without substance, especially when one considers the following statement by Hal Turner himself, quote, "If I had to assess my role in the world, I think I would be more like an inspiration to a whole slew of potential Timothy McVeighs. I don't make bombs, I make bombers," unquote. Manufacturing more McVeighs could be precisely the role that dubious elements within federal law enforcement had in mind for Turner. In fact, many of McVeigh's associates had ties to dubious elements within the FBI, ATF, and other federal law enforcement agencies. In late 1994, Carol Hall, an ATF informant in Elohim City, learned that former German infantry officer Andreas Straussmeyer and Aryan Nation member Dennis Mayhoon had planned a series of bombings that included the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. While Straussmeyer might be viewed as a disenfranchised extremist, his father was a respected member of the Christian Democratic Party. Straussmeyer was introduced to Elohim City by Kirk Lyons, the founder of the Southern Legal Resource Center, that is SLRC, and the white supremacist lawyer who successfully represented Louis Beam. That, of course, Beam was, of course, discussed by Paul in last week's installment. Beam, of course, introduced the concept of the leaderless resistance. But at any rate, Louis Beam was protected by Kirk Lyons against quote-unquote a sedition charge of plotting the overthrow of the government by force in order to set up an all-white nation in the Pacific Northwest. Parenthetically speaking, at this point, Kirk Lyons, SLRC, has also received funds from an individual named Richard T. Hines, a very, very powerful lobbyist who actually... Hines has been connected with the secessionist movement, has he not? That's correct. He's actually been a leader of the Jefferson Davis Camp 305, which is a faction of the Southern Heritage Group, the Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's the North Virginia-based chapter of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. He's also a managing editor of the Southern Partisan, which is a which is a publication that promotes the successionist ideas, and he's also one of these individuals who proves that the Confederates can actually conspire with and collaborate with carpetbaggers periodically. In 2000, he basically helped Bush when Bush was trailing behind McCain in his attempt to gain the Republican nomination. Hines was able to secure a victory for Bush in South Carolina by sending out 250,000 flyers that claimed that McCain was changing his tune on the issue of the Confederate flag. But Bush, according to Hines, was, quote, the only major candidate who refused to call the Confederate flag a racist symbol, unquote. And this, of course, brought all the neo-Confederates in South Carolina to Bush's aid, and Bush ended up winning and defeating McCain with ease. Given his adherence to the principles of successionism, certainly one could possibly hardly see any sort of aversion by Hines towards Louis Beam's goal of creating an all-white nation in the Pacific Northwest. Correct. Well, by February 1995, the ATF was poised to raid Alhim City based on information provided by Hal. This raid could have possibly prevented the bombing of the Murrah building on April 19, 1995. However, the more tragic story would begin to unfold when, on February 22nd, Agent Angela Finley, Hal's handler in the ATF, was informed by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol that the raid could not be conducted because the FBI had an ongoing investigation at Alhim City. Several unimpeachable witnesses, including Timothy McVeigh's friend, Katina Lawson, had stated that they saw the convicted OKC bomber with Strausmeyer a number of times before the 1995 bombing. Nevertheless, Strausmeyer enjoyed FBI protection, yet Strausmeyer was not the only white supremacist tied to Alhim City that had a connection to the government. It would later be revealed in the Tulsa courtroom that Robert Millard, the now deceased founder of Alhim City, was an informant to the FBI as well. McVeigh's association with such individuals reflects the unsettling nexus at which extremism and officialdom intersects. That Turner considers himself the progenitor of terrorists like McVeigh underscores the neo-Nazis' possible role as an agent provocateur. On June 3, 2009, Turner was arrested and charged with inciting his website audience to, quote, take up arms, unquote, against a state ethics official and two Connecticut politicians. Turner was taken into custody in New Jersey and was subsequently rearrested on June 24, 2009 at his New Jersey residence for threatening 3 federal appeals court judges in Chicago following a ruling upholding handgun bans. Turner was denied bail and his website was shut down on June 30th, 2009. Now, if one were to confine his or her vantage point to the dualistic portrait of heroic federal law enforcement officers battling fanatical extremists, this episode would appear to be a victory over the forces of racism and bigotry. However, revelations from Turner's trial call this dualistic view into question. On July 28th, Turner pleaded not guilty to threatening the 3 Chicago federal appellate judges and then sought his release from custody, citing his alleged role as an informant for the FBI. The judge denied Turner bail again on August 11th, citing the fact that the former radio talk show host had recorded a telephone conversation from his prison cell and posted it on the internet. The discussion included the identities of Turner's arresting FBI agents. Turner pleaded not guilty, and his lawyer stated that the defense would use, quote, Turner's background as an FBI informant, unquote. The core contention of Turner's defense was that the racist ideologue was trained by the FBI as an agent provocateur to provoke people. Turner was eventually released on a $500,000 bond in late October. His trial began on November 30th, 2009 and concluded December 4th, 2009. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury announced that it was deadlocked. During the course of Turner's trial, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, Amy Pickett, stated that the white supremacist was involved in, quote, national security intelligence, unquote. Consider the following exchange from pages 317 to 318 of the official trial transcript. Quote, question, was Mr. Turner considered a criminal informant, that is, somebody informing on criminal matters, or an intelligence informant? Answer, he was national security. He was an intelligence informant. Question, tell us the difference between a criminal informant and an intelligence or national security informant. Answer, a criminal informant would be someone on a criminal squad who is giving information on just regular criminal matters like drugs, white-collar crime. I never worked those matters. Question, bank robberies? Answer, right, yes. Question, and intelligence informants? Answer, national security intelligence, terrorism, foreign counterintelligence. They are people that are giving information that affects the national security of the United States, terrorism, matters that are going to affect the population or people overall, something that's really going to hinder and hurt a large group of people or the national security of the United States. Therefore, information or anything that they do is really so serious that it's not something that can be handled at the local level. It really has to go up to the Department of Justice. Question, for them to engage in criminal activity? Answer, yes. Question, with the approval of the FBI? Answer, and end quote. And the rest of the transcript is redacted from that point on. By the way, that portion of the transcript is an exchange between Pickett and Assistant U.S. Attorney William Hogan. And William Hogan on page 555 makes a rather shocking statement. He says, quote, there is no evidence in this case of any criminal activity committed by Hal Turner while he was an FBI agent, unquote. In this statement, Hogan clearly identifies Turner as an FBI agent. So now we know that it is a matter of public record that Hal Turner was in fact working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In fact, the New Jersey Record, in a November 29th, 2009 article by Mike Kelly and Peter J. Sampson, states, quote, they called him Valhalla, but it was more than a nickname. For more than 5 years, Hal Turner of North Bergen lived a double life. The public knew him as an ultra-right-wing radio talk show host, an internet blogger with an audience of neo-Nazis and white supremacists attracted to his scorched-earth racism and bare-knuckles bashing of public figures. But to the FBI and its expanding domestic counter-terror intelligence operations in the wake of the September 11th attacks, Turner was Valhalla, his code name as an informant who spied on his own controversial followers, unquote. The use of agent provocateurs is certainly nothing new. In fact, agent provocateurs have been employed by darker elements within federal law enforcement on numerous occasions to basically facilitate discord and chaos within specific target populations. Target populations that I might add have been were very much the focus of COINTELPRO programs. Take, for instance, a February 15th, 2007 article in the Orlando Sentinel entitled Neo-Nazi Rally Was Organized by FBI Informant. It reads, quote, a paid FBI informant was the man behind a neo-Nazi march through the streets of Paramore that stirred up anxiety in Orlando's black community and fears of racial unrest that triggered a major police mobilization. That revelation came Wednesday in an unrelated federal court hearing and has prompted outrage from black leaders, some of whom demanded an investigation into whether the February 2006 march was itself an event staged by law enforcement agencies. The FBI would not comment on what it knew about the involvement of its informant, 39-year-old David Gletty of Orlando, in the neo-Nazi event. In court Wednesday, an FBI agent said the Bureau has paid its informant at least $20,000 during the past 2 years. Wow, Gletty said when reached by phone late Wednesday. It is what it is. You were there in court. I can't really go into it in any detail now. Orlando City Council woman Daisy Linham, whose district includes the march route west of Interstate 4, said she wants to know who was behind the march, the neo-Nazis or the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. If it was staged, I would feel very uncomfortable and would ask for a full-scale investigation, Linham said. To come into a predominantly black community, which could have resulted in great harm to the black community, I would hate to be part of a game. It's a mockery to the community for someone else to be playing a game with the community, unquote. Linham has good reason to be very upset. On numerous occasions, very, very questionable venues have been chosen for the rallies of white supremacist and neo-Nazi organizations. Paul and I document one such instance in our book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. An October 15, 2005 riot in Toledo offers a prime case study in racial dialectics. The National Socialist Movement, a neo-Nazi organization, was scheduled to conduct a demonstration against so-called black crime. The protest received a very violent response, however. I'll read the CNN news report verbatim for the edification of the audience. Quote, most of the violence happened when residents who had pelted the Nazi marchers with bottles and rocks took out their anger on police, said Brian Jagodzinski, chief news photographer for CNN affiliate WTVG. Video showed crowds at around 2:25 p.m. using bats to break down a wooden fence as looters broke into a small grocery store. The crowd was very extremely agitated at the police for doing this, making arrests in the community when they should be doing this to the Nazis, Jagodzinski said. Around 3 p.m., crowds of young men pelted the outside of a two-story residence with rocks, smashed out the windows with wooden crates, ran inside and threw out the furniture and lamps from the upper-level windows to the sidewalk below. No police were on the scene. About 10 minutes later, the building's second story was in flames. As a crowd of people watched, when police arrived, they used pepper spray on counter-demonstrators and shot tear gas containers into the crowd, Jagodzinski said. He added that his news van and a police car had windows smashed and doors bent back, unquote. This civil unrest basically created the pretext for the implementation of authoritarian measures and considerable restrictions on civil liberties. The CNN news report states, quote, Toledo Mayor Jack Ford declared a state of emergency and asked for 50 highway patrol officers to reinforce Toledo police. A curfew came into effect at 8 p.m. for people roaming around the streets, he said, unquote. Now, there are several oddities surrounding this event suggesting that it, like the neo-Nazi rally in Orlando, was orchestrated for politically and socially expedient purposes. First, there is, again, the question concerning the demonstration's venue. Quote, it's not clear why the National Socialist Movement chose North Toledo for its march, said Ford, himself an African-American. It is not a neighborhood where you have a lot of friction in the first place, he said, unquote. In response to this question, the National Socialist Movement issued an interesting allegation. Quote, a spokesman for the NSM group, Bill White, blamed the riot on Toledo police, saying the police intentionally changed the group's march route to make it collide with a counter-demonstration, unquote. Now, given White's dubious affiliations with neo-Nazi and white supremacist interest, one could certainly question the veracity of his claim. However, his allegation creates more credence when one examines the ideological pedigree of the counter-demonstration. Quote, about 20 members from both the International Socialist Organization and One People's Project showed up, and some handed eggs to African-American residents to throw at the Nazi marchers, White said. Ford said that scenario was likely. based on the intelligence we received, that's exactly what they do. They come into town and get people riled up, Ford said. I think that it's a very common technique, unquote. So here it is, the second oddity, suggesting Hegelian manipulation. It should not be lost upon the audience that the NSM demonstration and its counter-demonstration rival both represent some variety of socialism. The NSM represents, of course, National Socialism, or more succinctly, Hungarian fascism. The International Socialist Organization represents more of a traditional variety of Marxism, something more akin to Marxism disseminated on the popular level as communism. But the distinctions are superficial at best. This becomes clear when one contemplates the etymology of communism and fascism. The appellation of communism comes from the Latin root communis, which means group living. Fascism is a derivation of the Italian word fascio, which is translated as bundle or group. Both fascism and communism are forms of coercive group living, or more succinctly, collectivism. The only substantial difference between the two is fascism's limited observance of private property rights, which is ostensible at best given its susceptibility to rigid governmental regulation. This is the heart and soul of the Hegelian dialectic, the pitting of two polar extremes against one another, but those polar extremes exhibit certain dialectical commonalities that make the synthesis of the two more likely. They are not dichotomous in relationship, they are not diametric in consequence. The core dialectical commonality makes the two more readily predisposed to a dialectical synthesis. In this instance, two polar extremes were used to basically create internal contention, discontent, and chaos within a community, which allowed for the implementation of authoritarian and police state measures in order to restore the order and restore social rest. At any rate, this is probably the real purposes for the FBI, or darker elements of the FBI's use of Hal Turner. Hal Turner, like so many other agent provocateurs, incites violence, incites civil unrest, discontent amongst radical adherents, and thereby facilitating an agenda of authoritarianism and police state draconian measures as a means to basically bring the chaos under control. Now, again, returning to something that was said earlier concerning Hal Turner and his anti-Jewish beliefs, there does seem to be this current within the Patriot movement, within the militia movement, within the white supremacist movement, that basically holds to Jewish conspiracy theories and the belief that the Jews are basically the hidden hand behind the world conspiracy today. And the listening audience might wonder, where in the world did this idea come from? It certainly seems to be an enduring one with a longevity that can't seem to be explained. To this day, portions of the Patriot community actually subscribe still to even the learned elders, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and a document that has long been proven to be a forgery and not really a Jewish document in any real sense. Well, the truth of the matter is that much of the Jewish conspiracy myth might have been created by criminalized portions of the intelligence community, beginning with an individual who was considered to be the father of American intelligence, Major General Ralph H. Van Diemen. Ralph H. Van Diemen began a basically collaboration with J. Edgar Hoover in 1922, when Hoover began funneling covert support, began receiving covert support from Van Diemen and his basically cohort, the Army's Military Intelligence Division, Brigadier General Barbaro Churchill. Van Diemen arranged for Hoover to collect a reserve officer's commission from the Military Intelligence Division. And when Van Diemen retired in 1929, he established this private network that was nationwide of spooks, informants, and spies. The group engaged in all manner of illegal activities, including the infiltration and surveillance of labor unions, of church groups, and numerous civil rights organizations, as well as many left-leaning political activist groups. Needless to say, the lack of oversight that such private intelligence organizations have, basically because they don't fall under the scrutiny of congressional oversight committees. Won the group a large appeal among the more criminalized elements of national security apparatus, and Van Diemen was receiving files from the Army and Navy intelligence as well as the FBI. And one of those training information with Van Diemen was again J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover established this reciprocal relationship with Van Diemen without the knowledge of his superiors. And when one looks at the Van Diemen private network's files, one finds that they are filled with virulent anti-Semitic ideas, many ideas that we find today among the patriot community and among a lot of populist pseudo-intellectuals and among the militia groups and the white supremacist groups. The greatest myth that one can find among the files of Van Diemen that are prevalent among the patriot community today is the myth that communism possesses an indisputable Jewish pedigree. One of the articles in Van Diemen's files was entitled "The Jews as the Apostles of Communism." Van Diemen had several military contacts, and many of these military contacts would report on subversives and would assign bizarre labels to these subversives that pointed towards a Jewish pedigree. They would refer to the subversives as active Jewish communists or ex-German Jew communist agitators. Informants claimed that quote, the revolutionary movement is gaining momentum through the energy and force of the Jews, unquote. Van Diemen's network also helped spread another piece of disinformation that still finds popularity among the patriot community today, and that's the idea that the Jews and Freemasonry are one and the same, and that the Jews are actually using the Freemasonic lodges as vehicles for revolution, for world revolutionary activities. Van Diemen collaborated closely with Margaret Kerr, who was the secretary of the Better America Foundation, which was a very racist organization. And Van Diemen read and subscribed to Kerr's writings, which offered, quote, proof of the sinister ties between Jewry, Bolshevism, and Freemasonry, unquote. Such ideas are routinely espoused by authors featured on the popular website of alternative radio show host Jeff Ritz. They're also subscribed to in large measure by Henry Mackow and just a number of other pseudo-intellectual populists that populate the patriot community these days. Eustace Mullins, you can just basically ramble down the line of individuals who have continued with this method and helped give it its longevity. The idea that the Freemasonry is actually a vehicle of the Jewish people. So there can be very little wonder why there is so much xenophobia today among grassroots activists. Right. Also, several adherents of the 9/11 Truth movement also espouse anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Blame the sole responsibility for the 9/11 attacks upon the shoulders of Israel and the Mossad. To be sure, there was some involvement by the Mossad in the 9/11 attacks, mainly concerning extreme foreknowledge. But this again is one of many fallacies that tend to emerge in conspiracy theory, in modern day conspiracy theories, is the belief in a monolithic organization, and the belief that all the blame, all the woes of the world could be laid at the doorstep of a single person or organizational entity, such as the Jews, such as the Catholic Church, such as the nation of Israel, and on and on and on it goes. But of course, conspiracies, being that they are the enterprises of men, are fraught with all the inherent weaknesses of the human condition. They are hardly monolithic, hardly unhearing. That's simply not a reality, and that's simply not debatable. That is an axiomatic reality that we see every day. We see it as is evidenced by the contentions, the internal contentions that are expressed by people who populate the higher tiers of the socioeconomic strata. That being said, these propensities, the proclivities towards a belief in a monolithic, unerring, omnipotent conspiracy are conceptually predisposed to such racist conspiracy theories, because if one can lay the blame upon one single organizational entity or one single individual, one can easily lay the blame upon one single race. And that's why people who adhere to a monolithic, unerring, omnipotent conspiracy theory tend to eventually express some affinity for these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. But again, a lot of these ideas are probably being circulated among the Patriot community by agent provocateurs that actually are on the payroll of several different government alphabet organizations, such as the FBI. And the problem is that they usually get a pass, and they're actually protected and allowed to go on spreading these bizarre ideas that basically provoke a lot of hatred, because they are labeled informants and basically seen as being necessary to help law enforcement collect intelligence on potentially violent organizations. But the truth of the matter is that yes, there are informants within the Patriot community that are there simply to monitor the Patriot community, but there are also individuals that are informants, but also also have a dual role as a provocateur. In other words, they monitor, collect intelligence, pass it on to their handlers, but at other times they periodically whip up the violence themselves, which was probably the case with Hal Turner. With the government's case, it'll never get beyond Hal Turner being labeled an FBI handler. The government will certainly make sure that, or an FBI informant, the government will certainly make sure that he is seen as an FBI informant, nothing more. I'm personally of the opinion that the whole case against Turner was complete wash, given the fact that the case was brought against him by the office of Patrick Fitzgerald. Patrick Fitzgerald, of course, is a longtime political operative that has been responsible for cover-up in several different cases. Chief among those cases was a Valerie Plame case. He made sure that the outing of Valerie Plame as a CIA operative, that the blame for that outing never reached further than Scooter Libby. And the truth is that it probably reached as high as Dick Cheney, and he was also responsible to a large degree for protecting Ali Mohammed, who is most likely the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. Although Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, an individual who he has family ties with, received the honors of the blame. It was more likely Ali Mohammed who was responsible for the planning of that attack. Patrick Fitzgerald himself referred to Ali Mohammed as, quote, the most dangerous man in America today, unquote. And yet Patrick Fitzgerald's office made no attempts at all to bring the man in or to make sure that the man was prevented in any of his activities. In many instances, legal representatives such as Fitzgerald actually function more in terms of damage control than they do in terms of really genuinely prosecuting criminals. And in the case of Hal Turner, his office was merely making sure that that the view was yes, Hal Turner was an FBI informant, but nothing more. He certainly wasn't an agent provocateur. So they're basically, allowing his role as an informant to get out, but they're basically suppressing the fact that he was also an agent provocateur for darker, shadier factions within the Bureau. Yeah, the shades of, almost shades of the Monica Lewinsky case, where the prosecution against Bill Clinton really were not interested in any of the substantial crimes of the president. It was merely just the scandal of being in an extramarital affair with Monica Lewinsky, which of course was really irrelevant and really. And it certainly helped to bleach out the crimes of Nina. It helped to bleach out the campaign financing with the Lippo Group and a little bit of technology transfer to the Red Chinese. None of that was looked at. Instead, there was a lot of stories about states on dresses and cigars being used as dildos. Right. But at any rate, the FBI was more than aware, or at least Turner's handlers at the FBI were more than aware of his radical pedigree. Anyone who examined his resume before 2003 would have known that the man was very, very much involved in the white supremacist and neo-Nazi movement. In 2002, he began broadcasting his daily radio show. He spoke at rallies of the Aryan nations in north central Pennsylvania. In year 2000, he entered elective politics, and he came in last in a three-way primary race for the Republican nomination to challenge U.S. Representative Bob Menendez. In 1997, he managed the New Jersey campaign of Libertarian Murray Sabrin. In 1994, he organized a rally in Trenton attended by members of the white supremacist nationalist movement in support of a WABC radio host, Bob Grant. And in 1992, interestingly enough, he served as the North Jersey coordinator for Pat Buchanan's presidential campaign. Pat Buchanan, of course, has expressed some distinctly WASP racialist sentiments, but all this comprised Turner's pre-FBI informant resume. He was actually recruited by the FBI as a confidential informant codenamed Valhalla in 2003. So the big question did the FBI, should the FBI have known better at the time they were recruiting Hal Turner? Could the FBI be held equally accountable for any fiery rhetoric and possible acts of violence that Hal Turner inspired? This is not the first time either that we have this kind of collaboration between the FBI and white supremacists. If you go back to the time when Hoover was very much still in control of the FBI, find out about an individual by the name of Gary Thomas Rowe. He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and he was involved in the May 14th, 1960 attacks on Freedom Riders who were arriving by Greyhound bus in Birmingham, Alabama. Rowe was a paid informant of J. Edgar Hoover, and he was never charged for his role in the May 14th attack on the Freedom Riders. He wasn't even reprimanded by the Bureau. He could have used the clout that he held with the KKK to actually prevent the May 14th beatings from happening. He had a veto power in the Eastview 13 Clavering, so he could have voted to keep the assault from occurring. Yes, and he did not do that. There's also evidence that he was involved in several other acts of racial violence, including the bombing of Birmingham's 16th Baptist Church and the slaying of a civil rights worker, Viola Greg Liuzzo. But in both of those cases, he was given a polygraph test, and he failed. And even though he had failed the lie detector test, the Bureau took no action against him. Hoover even attempted to discredit a witness who incriminated Rowe for the Liuzzo shooting. Rowe had actually bragged about his killing of Liuzzo to an unidentified black man, and Hoover, of course, knew all about Rowe's criminal background, and no action was ever taken against this particular KKK member. He received $22,000 from the Bureau during his time working with the Bureau, which was about a five-year span from 1960 to 1965. And of course, if you adjust for inflation, that's a substantial amount of money. That is a very substantial amount of money. And instead of ever ending up in prison or facing any kind of legal action whatsoever, Rowe ended up being relocated to California and then to Georgia under a new identity that was procured for him by the FBI. So I mean, this is just another example of how this kind of collaboration. Right. Well, COINTELPRO did covertly fund the KKK so long as the KKK restricted its attacks to mutually held targets by COINTELPRO, and they really only began to initiate any kind of COINTEL operations against the KKK when Bobby Kennedy began urging such action to be taken. Of course, Kennedy and Hoover hated one another's guts, right? But eventually you're going to have to explain yourself if you're not making any kind of moves against the white supremacist criminals, and so of course Hoover to conceal his own racist beliefs would eventually begin to initiate COINTELPRO programs to disrupt KKK activities. Right now, the co-option and control of radical enclaves. Would it be fair to say that that is a universal template in establishing totalitarian control? And if so, are there other case studies that we could briefly cite that transcend the borders of the United States itself? In fact, they are cases in point that are not domestic, but took place in other countries and other periods in history where we see the use of radical enclaves as a precursor to the ascendance of a totalitarian power. Yes, it is. The control of radicalized portions of the population for the purposes of creating a pretext for police state measures, is historical. It's not just a method or a tactic reserved for the American elite. It's been used by elites in different countries. It's a trans-historical, trans-cultural precedent. That's correct. A prime example that I can think of would be Nazi Germany. If you look back at William Shire's book, his monumental book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, he points out that the Dutch communist with a passion for arson, named Marinus van der Lubbe, who was pinned with the burning down of the Reichstag, could not have possibly have caused that particular case of arson. Quoting from the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, quote, "It was established at the subsequent trial at Leipzig that the Dutch half-wit did not possess the means to set so vast a building on fire so quickly. 2.5 minutes after he entered the great central hall was fiercely burning. He had only his shirt for tinder. The main fires, according to the testimony of experts at the trial, have been set with considerable quantities of chemicals and gasoline. It was obvious that one man could not have carried them into the building, nor would it have been possible for him to start so many fires in so many scattered places in so short a time," unquote. So in all likelihood, other parties were involved in the burning of the Reichstag. It's just simply the outbreak of fires was so prolific that it could not have been carried out by one Dutch half-wit communist. It in fact came out at the Nuremberg trials that the Nazis were involved in the Reichstag burning. Hans Gustavus, who was an official in the Prussian Ministry of the Interior, testified at Nuremberg that it was Goebbels who thought up the idea of setting the Reichstag on fire. This is an example of taking radicalized individuals and either putting the idea in their head and having them conduct a terrorist attack with protection, or basically failing to move against them, or conducting the act of terrorism yourself and then blaming it on that particular radicalized group. Right, and as I previously mentioned, as is the case with the Hegelian dialectic, when it's redirected towards the realm of sociopolitics, as Marx did with it, those polar extremes that are involved in the dialectical skirmish exhibit certain core dialectical commonalities that make them conceptually and philosophically predisposed to a dialectical synthesis. That is, they are not diametric in consequence, they are not dichotomous in relationship, and they actually facilitate the merger between radical populations. The promulgation of Hegelian dialectics also results in a dichotomizing of certain populations. For instance, a person, an average individual who is absolutely and justifiably outraged at the atrocities of fascism might view communism as a viable alternative, when in fact communism and fascism are really ideological kissing cousins. They exhibit certain core dialectical commonalities that really make them just competing factions competing varieties of socialism, really with only superficial differences. But nevertheless, the individual who is frightened by fascism would erroneously conclude that communism is the only viable alternative. So we have this dichotomizing of the public mind and the gathering of public opinion within polar extreme camps of a dialectic, and thus being placed in opposition to one another and gradually migrating towards a synthesis. And always overlooked is the excluded middle, which therein lies the truth. The excluded middle, which would basically reject the postulates of either polar extreme and in favor of what is real, what is reality, instead of what is ideology. But remember, another motive for controlling these kinds of groups, or allowing these kind of groups to continue on, and that's the popularity of successionist ideas among these groups. So successionism, again, is not a patriotic idea whatsoever. It lends itself to the globalist method of regionalism, which is splintering or fragmenting a larger political unit into smaller political units so that it can be integrated into a greater international entity, right? That's an overarching supranational authority, because the nation has been atomized. There is no sovereign state left. The sovereign state has to be amalgamated into something new. That's into probably a more feudal configuration under some sort of supranational authority. But anyways, the Hal Turner case and the other cases that we have pointed out this week and last week as well, really points to the disturbing fact that Professor Peter Dale Scott's concept of deep politics is not just an interesting theory. It is a political reality, and of course, deep politics holds that periodically the overworld actually collaborates with the criminal underworld that it claims to be wrapped in mortal combat. Of course, because when agendas and initiatives coincide with one another, then collaboration becomes more enticing, and hence you have, the FBI covertly financing the KKK's attacks against mutually held targets, namely the civil rights movement. That's one instance where the interest of the KKK and the FBI, or Hoover's FBI, synchronized rather comfortably. Well, this concludes our conversation over this topic, the topic of successionism, the militia movements, the Patriot movement, and of course Hal Turner. We'd like to thank the listening audience for tuning in. Those of you who would like to check out our book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century, which examines several of the topics we discussed in this installment of our show, can do so by going to Amazon.com. You want the 2006 book search edition. That edition of the book is twice as large as the 2003 edition. Many of the predictions that we made, many of the prognostications that we set forth in that edition of the book have come to pass, and some are unfolding as we speak, namely the economic crisis that currently besets the world. Those of you who would like to check out our articles on the World Wide Web can do so by going to Terry Melanson's excellent Conspiracy Archive. Go to www.conspiracyarchive.com, click the articles link. A list of contributing authors will come up. You'll see Paul and my names there. You simply click that link and you will be transported to the most comprehensive collection of all of our articles on the World Wide Web. Also, Terry maintains a blog at conspiracyarchive.com. At that blog, you will find archived audio of interviews that we've done on radio shows and podcasts, and installments of the Collins Bros Unleashed. Those of you who have questions or comments pertaining to the show, feel free to drop us a line, you can do so by emailing us at thecollinsbros@yahoo.com. That's the Collins Bros, TheCollinsBros @yahoo.com. Feel free to drop us a line with any questions or any input that you might have. Please keep it constructive. Thanks to everybody for listening. We also would like to thank our sponsor, Suke Koji's Martial Arts and Ninja Gear. Suke Koji offers some of the finest martial arts equipment, including swords, grappling hooks, martial arts uniforms, instructional tapes, booklets, cassettes. So we thank Suke Koji for his gracious sponsorship, and we'd also like to thank our friend, brother Bert Mills, for graciously supplying us with this platform. Bert Mills is our outstanding producer. He does a wonderful job with the show, and he's provided us with this platform now for several months, and we're looking forward to him doing so for several months to come. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we hope to see you again for another installment of the Collins Bros Unleashed. And it's basically a method of destroying national sovereignty through fragmentation. The ultimate ends of regionalism is world government. To support this contention, we referred to an article by N.S.B. Gross entitled "Regionalism and Nationalism," which appeared in the flagship publication of the globalist and elite combine, the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR. Grass wrote, quote, "The direct effect of regionalism may be to make the state weaker politically but stronger economically and socially. Or the region looking to regional convenience may make new alignments leading to the creation of new states or to international states, European, American, and so on, or ultimately to a world state," unquote. In his book, Geoeconomic Regionalism and World Federalism, Maurice Parmelee was even more blunt at pointing out regionalism's usefulness as a tool by which one undermines national sovereignty and introduces world government. Parmelee writes, quote, "There can be no permanent peace so long as each nation retains its sovereignty. There can be no effective world organization to solve the economic and social problems of mankind so long as the nation is the unit of organization. The region, limiting national sovereignty and furnishing a suitable unit of organization for a world federation is a practicable solution," unquote. Given successionism's potential as a tool for regionalism, it is interesting to find that Governor Rick Perry of Texas actually implicitly promoted succession during an April 15, 2009 Tea Party protest. Perry told the audience, quote, "Texas is a unique place. When we came into the Union in 1845, one of the issues was that we would be able to leave if we decided to do that. My hope is that America and Washington in particular pays attention. We've got a great union. There's absolutely no reason to dissolve it. But if Washington continues to thumb its nose at the American people, who knows what may come of that," unquote. Before you conclude that Perry made such a suggestive statement because he is a patriot, Hello, this is Paul and Philip Collins welcoming you to another episode of the Collins Bros Unleashed. This week we are going to continue with our exploration of agent provocateurs and the Patriot movement and attempts by deviant elites and the criminalized faction of the intelligence community to use the Patriot movement to fulfill a sinister agenda that includes undermining constitutional government and national sovereignty. We began at last week's show by looking at an article written by Confederate apologist Chuck Baldwin entitled, "Is Obama Really Preparing for Civil War?" The Baldwin article relies heavily on an article at the European Union Times website. While the European Union Times website claims to be an online copyrighted newspaper founded in October 2009, it is in fact a blog and not an official media organ. The article at the EU Times is entitled, "Obama Orders 1 Million U.S. Troops for Civil War," and it was originally authored by someone writing under the name Saoirse Fowle. This likely a pseudonym. Fal's writings appear at David Booth's WhatDoesItMean.com website. Booth is the author of an anti-Christian tract entitled Dirty Filthy Christians, Treatise on the Most Dangerous Death Cult in Human History, and his website is filled with sensational yellow journalism that tops the headlines of most supermarket tabloids. Most of the articles are written by Fal, and one need only read the story titles to understand that her allegations are not supported by the evidence. Here are just a few of the titles of Fal's articles. Obama issues immediate assassination order for Mexican President Calderon. Obama orders total takedown of U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. Obama warned by CIA, surrender or join Kennedy. And of course, our personal favorite, Russia's FSB reports pop icon Michael Jackson assassinated by CIA. Of course, none of these claims made by Fal or whatever that this person's name is are supported by the facts. They are baseless contentions, and their sensationalist character may be an attempt to attract a large audience of people with a taste for the unreal and the fantastic. I don't think has been thoroughly expunged. Therefore, it is now time for the states to stand up to this meddlesome, ever-growing tyranny that is known as Washington, D.C., and defend the rights and liberties of their citizens, unquote. Then Baldwin recommends a series of prescriptions written by Dr. Edwin Vieira as, quote, a template for every state governor and legislature that truly cares about liberty, unquote. These prescriptions appear in Vieira's article at newswithviews.com entitled Tea Parties Need Teeth. In the article, Vieira recommends a revitalization of the militias of several states. He is, of course, referencing the Second Amendment of the Constitution, but the idea of a militia seems to be ripped from its contextual matrix by Vieira. Vieira views the militia as a means of transforming each state into its own sovereign body that can reject any and all authority emanating from the federal government. Vieira writes, quote, the purpose of revitalizing the militia is to combine all the elements of each state's homeland security, including police, emergency response, and so on, under the militia in order to obviate top-down control by the police state apparatus being set up through the Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C., and its various satellites, transmissions belts, and fellow travelers around the country, unquote. Vieira's article comes from an address that he presented at the National Heritage Center for Constitutional Studies, and it is obviously admonishing the Tea Party participants to militarize and establish a system separate from the federal government, which he refers to as the general government. Vieira writes, quote, we the people need to revitalize the militia of the several states in order to regain and retain popular control over state governments, and through them regain and retain control over the two fundamental powers of sovereignty. One, the power of the purse, i.e. currency and credit. Two, the power of the sword, i.e. community self-defense. As we pointed out last week, succession is anything but a patriotic act. We observed that succession can act as a means of regionalizing. Regionalism is a globalist method of undermining national security. Who views succession as a patriotic act, consider the good governor's participation in the annual Bilderberg Conference. Perry's involvement in the Bilderberg meetings was reported by Christy Hopp in a May 31st, 2007 Dallas Morning News article entitled Perry Off to the Secret Forum in Turkey. Hopp writes, quote, Governor Rick Perry is flying to Istanbul, Turkey today to speak at the super-secret Bilderberg Conference, a meeting of about 130 international leaders of business, media, and politics. The invitation-only conference was started in 1954 and named for the Dutch hotel where the conference was first held. Those who attend promise not to reveal what was discussed. Security is tight, and the press and public is barred, unquote. Hunt goes on to explain that Perry, quote, was invited to attend and speak about state-federal relations, unquote. Given the conference's secrecy, we are left only to speculate said about state and federal relations. If what he said was even close to his statements at the April 15, 2009 Tea Party, however, we can be sure secessionist themes were prominent in his presentation. Bilderberg participants would not be opposed to such ideas because they understand the destructive effects secession has on national sovereignty. Bilderberg founder Prince Bernard once stated, quote, "It is difficult to re-educate people who have been brought up on nationalism to the idea of relinquishing part of their sovereignty to a supranational body," unquote. Succession could provide a useful tool in the re-educating process Prince Bernard believed needed to take place. After all, if a country is splintered enough, nationhood becomes a mere fiction. So upon closer examination, one realizes Governor Barry is not working in the best interest of America when he espouses secessionist ideas. By promoting militias among Tea Party participants, Edwin Vieira seems to be pushing Tea Party participants into a movement that has historically been controlled by dark, sinister portions of the state and criminalized portions of the intelligence community. I believe that no greater example exists of agent provocateurs among the Patriot. It'll allow the possibility that Fowle's articles are disinformation meant to muddy the waters for legitimate researchers into the world of conspiracy and geek politics. But understand that there are a lot of hacks out there who know all too well that outrageous claims sell books, articles, tapes, DVDs, etc. The main reason I don't totally discount the possibility that Fowle is a disinformation is the fact that he, she, or it is mindful to make sure that small elements of truth are contained in many articles to ensure that readers are drawn in. Fowle intentionally drops references to very real intelligence crimes such as Operations Northwoods and very real political anomalies that should raise concern, such as the CIA's relocation of its domestic division to Denver. But these and other factional tidbits are then used to take high dive leaps into fictional tales about assassination plots and claims of imminent martial law and imminent war. But we don't believe that Baldwin was necessarily concerned with the veracity of Fowle's claims. The reason that Baldwin sourced Fowle is because Fowle's writings helped reinforce Baldwin's contention that states should start breaking away from the United States. As a matter of fact, in the Baldwin article that cites Fowle, one reads the following, quote, "The fact is we do need a revolution, but not a revolution of anarchy and pitchforks. The history of France should be ample evidence of the futility of this strategy. We need a revolution of the individual states to reclaim their sovereignty and fight for the liberties of their sovereigns, we the people." That is exactly what our forefathers did in 76. America's founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, declares that our states are free and independent. And so they are. We are not one nation with one all-powerful central government. We are a confederation of nation-states united in a voluntary union, with each state reserving to itself the power and authority of self-determination and ceding the federal government limited, specifically delineated duties and limitations that have been totally ignored to the point that, for all intents and purposes, our once great constitutional republic